FX Nation, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another video. And as we continue to answer your questions that you guys ask us in the comments, I figured it was a good time to answer some of the biggest ones, and that's really concerning about the types of patterns that we trade. I know that there's a lot of new people or new traders to the channel, and they ask a lot of questions about the specific patterns that I talk about in my videos. So what I decided to do is I'm going to put a 4-part series on the specific patterns that we trade. That way there is no more questioning about what the patterns are, and we'll have them on a playlist and you guys can review them over and over and over again and things of that nature, so you can get really adjusted to the type of trading style that we do here on this specific channel. All right, so this is going to be video 1 or part 1 of the 4-video series, and again we're going to break down each individual pattern so that way you know specifically what it is, examples of them, and things of that nature. All right, so without further ado guys, let's get this video started. Okay, so patterns and timing guys, the two most important aspects of the strategy: patterns and timing. If you can't identify the pattern and you cannot identify it in the right time, you're not going to be able to trade the strategy. All right, so we're going to cover this, a very important topic. We're going to cover all of the different patterns that we're going to trade, along with all the different timing aspects that go along with it. We're going to show you real examples on the charts of what they look like, so you know exactly what you're looking for. So let's start with a type 1 setup. What exactly is a type 1 setup? What makes it a type 1 setup, right? The type 1 setup, all it is basically you have your Asian range, right? So this is the beginning of the day here, this yellow line, right? And then this box is basically your Asian range. Essentially, you have market makers that basically trade initially like this, within this box, okay? Now, this box, this Asian range, is essentially from 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. Okay, all times, by the way, are Eastern. Why is it at between 8 and 2? That's because basically 8 p.m. is where when the Tokyo session starts. Okay, so Tokyo session starts what my Asian range is. At 5 o'clock is basically the reset time where market makers reset everything for the next day. Okay, from 5 to 8 is pretty much the only thing that's trading is the Aussie and New Zealand. Okay, is from 5 to 8 is the beginning, the first 4 hours or so of that particular session. Okay, and this box here basically sets the initial high of the day and the initial low of the day. Now, what creates a type 1 setup is basically when market makers take price and they take price above or below this Asian box. Essentially, it would look like something like this. Okay, or it would look essentially something like this. Okay, now the distance as far as from the bottom of the box to when price starts, it could be anywhere from 25 to to 50 pips. Okay, so the distance from the top of the box to when it stops, it could be anywhere from 25 to 50 pips. Same thing from the bottom to when it stops. It could be anywhere from 25 to 50 pips. It depends on how far market makers need to go down to convince traders to get into a trade to trap them. Once the initial move or the initial push is made to get retail traders to go long in this example, right? You basically have the type 1 can do this. Basically an M pattern coming back down. Okay. This box up here is basically your trading zone for London. The second box here in this example is basically your trading zone for US session. All right, so the times for 3:15 to 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time is this box. Okay, the US box, that's basically going to be 8:15 to about noon, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And this is AM. Okay, so those are the two boxes, what the two boxes represent, the time frames. The reason why this is important is because we make it pretty simple, guys. Our trading is very, very black and white. Okay, it's either yes or no. The reason that we make it that way is because we want you to not have any kind of emotional attachment or psychological issues when you're trading. And this happens a lot with retail traders. Okay. And so we try to make this strategy very black and white, very yes and no, because it makes it super easy for you to just make a decision on whether you should take a trade or you should not take a trade. Those are the specific times for those boxes. Now, since you're using the trading view, these should already be set for you once you add the indicator. Type 1 setups, all we're looking for is basically market makers to make a false move or push up or down that's outside of the box, anywhere 25 to 50 pips away from the top or the bottom of the box. Okay? That's the first thing that you're looking for on a type 1 setup. All right, so type 1 setup seems to be the most popular to trade because they're the easiest one to identify. Because essentially, once you get a move past the high here or the low here, the initial high or low of the day, the only kind of setup that you can get for a London session is going to be a type 1 setup, right? So it just makes it very simple to understand that type of setup. Focus on capturing M and W formations only. Second leg M or W patterns. Just to make it really simple. Okay? So what are the different types of patterns, essentially type 1 patterns that you could potentially get in these examples? Okay? So let's talk about this. So the first one is basically where you would have something like this. That's an M pattern that happens, all of it, within the box, essentially, of London. Okay? The other type of M pattern that you could see is essentially when you have the first leg happens during the London session, and then the second leg actually happens during the New York session. Okay, so you'll have a variation like that happen. All right, the other variation that you might have that could happen is you could very well essentially get a first leg push that's just at the very beginning of the box, and then essentially you get the second leg inside of the London box. Okay, the most important part of this, guys, is number one, the push that happens outside of the initial high and low of the Asian range. Okay, that's very simple to allow you to identify that you're looking for a type 1 pattern. And then the second thing is the variation on the theme essentially that you're going to be getting. Okay, so whether the first leg is just on the beginning part of the box, second leg on the London box, or whether you get first leg of the M during the London box, second leg during the New York session, and then back down, or if you get both legs, both first and second leg like this inside of the London box. Okay, same way for W essentially. Same thing. So if you have your boxes here for London and then another box here for the US session, same thing. It could be like this, right? Or it could be like this. Okay? Or the last one where you could have the first leg just outside of this box here, and then the second leg comes in basically like this. So all these things are basically different variations of the same pattern. So that essentially is a type 1 pattern. Okay, either way, either going up or going down to make an M or W. All right, guys, so let's go ahead and let's take a look at the type 1 setup, and let's examine it so we know exactly what we're looking for, what the pattern is, and let's go ahead and take a look. All right, so first things first, we have here's our Asian range, and as we go ahead and we play this along, obviously we go ahead and we see that market makers are basically moving the market up, and we're going above essentially the Asian range, right? So here's the Asian range. Here's about 14, almost 15 pips or so. And as we go up and we start moving, we basically move up. And if we go ahead and take a look here, it's about 20 pips or so. I think it goes up a little bit higher than that, actually. We're up now, let's say 30 pips or so. Okay, so remember that for a type 1 setup, we're looking for ideally anywhere from, up, it could be up to 50 pips, guys, that market makers move this market up. And that's really all done to just convince you to get into a position, right? Because market makers, their job is to make money. They can't make money unless you are in a position on a live account. Okay, so their job is to basically get you to go in to a trade and convince you to get into a trade. So what's the easiest way to convince you to get into a trade? Well, that's to basically make a move, a sharp and steady move to get you into a trade, a false breakout, a stop hunt, whatever you want to call it, right? To get you into a trade, right? So I want you to notice what happens here. So this all happens pretty much during the London session, right? As the main part of the London session ends, which is the box here, we start to get into basically the US session. And so essentially what do we have here? We have the first leg that's right here. Second leg now starts to form, which is basically the move down, comes back up, and then boom, here is essentially the second leg, right? And so as you can see, we start to basically move straight down during the US session. Now, basically this comes out to be about 46 pips or so. Now, is this type 1 pattern valid? It is, right? It's a type 1 setup that's basically outside of the range, well, within let's say 15 to 50 pips. The first leg is in the London session. Second leg is essentially the beginning of the US session. Okay, so of course we do have, as you can see here, a M pattern, right? And so that's the setup. That's the pattern that you want to look for a type 1. But let's take a look at a couple more examples of type 1 setups so you know, again, so you know exactly what they look like, okay? All right, so again, as we play this, you'll see essentially what happens is that we go straight down, and you can see, so we get the first leg here, we come back up, come back down, retest it again. You see how basically how the low stays protected. Now also this orange line here just happens to be previous week's low. Okay, so not only are we going straight down, but we're tagging essentially previous week's low. All right, so all that basically is extra confidence that it should give you about this particular trade. Now if we measure this, we're pretty much looking about 26 pips, 27 pips or so, essentially from the bottom of the Asian range, right? So as we play this, you'll basically see what happens here. Okay, so here's the first leg, and then here's the second leg, essentially that happens where? In the US session, in the US box, right? And you can see once they get all the traders done, they move away from it, and coincidentally enough, like look where they go to. Essentially they go back up to where? The middle of the Asian range. You see that? So essentially you're looking at about 25 pips or so on that particular trade. Basically got a nice W formation here. Second leg, there's your trade there. Okay, now one thing that you will notice is that during the New York session, if you're trading the New York session, or you'll notice a lot that if you take trades during the New York session, a lot of times your essentially your take profit is going to be about 20 to 25 pips, unless it is news induced. Most of the time, that's pretty much what you're going to grab out of some of these pairs, is about 20 to 25 pips. If it's news induced, then obviously it'll be a lot more than that. But essentially, that's what you would ideally see. All right, here's another type 1 setup as well. So let's go ahead and play this out. You can see it as it's developing. You can see that essentially we start to move to create what we would perceive as the low of the day. And here we go right here. You basically see we're below the Asian range here, and we're should be about maybe 10 pips or so. Yeah, about 8 pips below the Asian range. And so what you're going to see now is you can see the first leg essentially is already produced right here. Second leg here produced, and then now we're working our way back up essentially. So you'll see here, boom. And so that is another example of a type 1 setup. And you see about 40 pips or so move. And as you can see, the first and second leg all happened essentially inside of the London box. All right, let's take a look at a couple more here. All right, let's take a look at this one here, and let's play this out so you can see how it develops. I want you guys to notice, essentially, as every candle prints, I want you to notice the movement of these candles. Okay, so like this one right here, you see it move all the way down and then pop back up again. Very important that you notice how this is, and this is why it's very important as well to wait for the candle to close before you make any actual entries or any actual decisions, because this happens all the time. But let's see how this plays out here. You can see we essentially are making what looks like a first leg here potentially. And now you can see we made the first leg here, went back up. Okay, now we're tagging what? The yellow line here is yesterday's high, right? So we're basically tagging yesterday's high. Now, here's another interesting fact that I want you guys to notice is the fact that when this kicked up down to make basically the M formation of the middle of the M, look where we went to and stopped. The top of the range. You see that? Here is another type 1 setup. And it's like this. There it is. So you see this one's a little bit of a different variation because you had what you thought was the first leg here, came back up for a second leg, right? And it actually created a third leg right here and straight down. As long as your high is not taken out, you're good, right? So here's another example of a type 1 setup. All right, so as we take a look at this other type 1 here, again, we're waiting, and you can see the movement already of price starting to go down. Now you can see potentially that this being a first leg, and then it goes down for the second leg. But you can see here, as we come back up, we're outside of the box already, so we can't really do anything about that. But here we can, right? So what you thought, again, it's just like the other example, what you thought was the first leg really wasn't. It's basically like this, and then it goes up. These are the type 1 patterns that you should be accustomed to and what you should be looking for. The important factors of a type 1 setup essentially are that we want to make sure that the first and second legs, okay, the first leg can be here, let's say here, second leg here and up, right? So you can have a first leg that's outside of the box here. The second leg, though, has to be inside of the box for it to be a valid type 1 pattern that you can take. So another example would be if the first leg was here like this, or the last example is essentially if the first leg is in the London box, second leg in the US box, and it goes up. We're very specific in what we're looking for, and we like it that way because it allows us not to trade everything that we see, right? We don't want to trade everything. One thing that you're going to notice as you start to learn this strategy fully and understand everything about it is that you're not here to trade every single MNW that you see. There are very specific rules and things that we look for in order for those patterns to be valid. Okay? All right, guys, so that was the type 1 pattern. I hope that this answers a lot of your questions, if not all of your questions, regarding type 1 patterns, what they are, timing of it, and things of that nature. So I hope that you found value in this particular video, and I hope that you will find value in this 4-part series that we're going to do for you. All right, guys. So if you like this type of content, guys, if you'd like to see different series on different topics, let me know in the comments below. Like the video, share the content, guys. And guys, if you need any more help, please join us on FXM Plus. We have just about another 2.5 weeks to go for the special on FXM Plus, which is getting the Blueprint Summit videos available to those users who sign up within the next 2.5 weeks. All right, guys, if you need any more help, join us on FXM Plus. We have weekly sessions every single week, every single Sunday. We have them Q&A sessions. We talk about the upcoming week and everything like that. You guys can ask as many questions as you want. And most importantly, we're just there to help as a community. Enjoy this week's trading, and always trade safe and trade consistent.